I'm Sarah Burke, and this is the Women in Media podcast. Now, traditionally, you've been hearing me speak to people in music and entertainment, in broadcasting, in sports and news, but I'm branching out a little bit here, and I've been thinking about the type of media that I consume. I don't even know how I stumbled upon her account, but Anna Lee is my guest today, aka the Cannabinista. She's a cannabis content creator, cannabis advocate, and cannabis recipe developer. And you're going to want to check the show notes because she's got all sorts of links for you. Anna, thank you for coming on the Women in Media podcast. How are you?
Thank you, Sarah. I'm good.
So we're at the end of a long week, and I know that you just held a massive event in Toronto because you try to bring that education into community. So tell me about the event that you did a week ago, just to start, because I was kind of following along from the sidelines.
It's actually crazy that it was only a week ago because I'm still recovering from that craziness. And I didn't expect so much work to be in events, but here we are now, and I'm feeling the afterglow still from the event. What I put together was an event focused around mindful consumption. This is a topic that I think needs to be talked about more in the cannabis industry, or just in general, is about being mindful with how we consume cannabis. And I think it helps to also eliminate some of the stigmas that traditional media has of cannabis consumers, us being lazy, us being stoners, us being unproductive, or whatever it is.
Preach.
A lot of people don't know that cannabis can be used as a really mindful tool to actually potentially enhance your life, right? When used safely, when used responsibly. So this event that I curated was for my community. It was the first time ever that I met them in real life after many years of just being online. A lot of people were like kind of shocked, and they were like, whoa, this is you in real life, because they only see me doing TikToks and Instagrams, right? On a 16:9 screen. So what we did was had a beautiful afternoon in a beautiful loft space in Toronto, where we learned about how do you set intention prior to consuming cannabis? How do you explore different methods of consumption other than smoking cannabis? So I demonstrated how to make cannabis-infused mocktails. And then we learned about cannabis in general and connected with other like-minded individuals. What was crazy was a lot of people actually came alone, which was really interesting.
Wow.
Yeah. And when I was reading the intention cards and talking to people, the reason why a lot of them came alone was because they felt lonely and they didn't have people in their life to connect to that also either consumed cannabis or at least accepted them for consumption. And a lot of them felt that I created a really welcoming space where, everyone had a common passion. We loved cannabis, we loved food, and we were brought together for that.
So interesting you say that, because when you think about even like alcohol culture, right? Most people, I would say, you're usually drinking with people, right? And sometimes, especially at this age, I don't know how old you are. I'm 36 years old, and I might be the lonely cannabis user in the group.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I'm the same as well. Like, I don't drink anymore. I've been alcohol free for 3 to 4 years now. And like, I do have that sense of loneliness amongst my friend group. And I've been trying to find ways to incorporate myself still in social settings with them, right? So I have like cans of, cannabis infused sparkling beverage, right? Where it's very discreet and I can pour it in my cup and no one knows, right? And there's not that awkward discussion of like, oh, what are you drinking? Or what are you not drinking? Right. So it's crazy how our world is evolving as new technology comes out, I guess you could say.
Yeah, I bet you half the products that you had at your event a week ago did not exist 5 years ago.
No, definitely not. I mean, perhaps in the legacy market, but we're seeing that with legalization in Canada, it's being brought to the forefront. But a lot of people still don't know that this type of technology exists, where you can literally add drops of cannabis into a water-based drink and then just drink it.
Sip away. So let's go back to your first exposure to cannabis. I'm so interested.
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone, when this is like, and by no ways is this like suggesting that people should do this, right? When I look back at my experience with cannabis, it was irresponsible and I was uneducated. But I think everyone goes through that, where they try a puff in high school or university or college or whatever, and they either like it, they get really stoned, they get really hungry, and that's kind of that, right? Like, people just see it in traditional media, like they think of like Harold and Kumar, and that's kind of what we grew up with, was like Seth Rogen portraying Pineapple Express. And I'm not going to lie, I used to be against cannabis growing up. And I used to have a perception that people who consumed cannabis were the negative connotation of stoner. Huh. And so I've made a whole 180 in terms of like my perspective. And it was because I was uneducated and I judged it without actually experiencing it firsthand. and commenting about cannabis in an intelligent way. And I think a lot of people who do have negative perceptions of cannabis, they've often never consumed. Same thing with other more, on the fringe like psychedelics or mushrooms and that whole world now, right? People kind of comment on things that they don't actually have experience with. But
True.
anyways, back to the story. I've consumed it throughout my early, late, mid 20s, but it really wasn't until like legalization and a little bit before that where I actually tried to understand the science of it. And I started trial and erroring more and using it in a different way that was actually enhancing my life and not using it as a just
Escape.
like there's nothing wrong with recreational use, but I was using it in a different approach.
I like that. Okay. And what about your experience using it in public? Tell me about early experiences using it in public and maybe what led you to your work.
Hmm. Using cannabis in public has never really been a thing for me. Like when I think about my early days of using it, it was always with one other person or with a close group, or it was a way to like relax after being stressed from a day of chaos, right? Now when I do use it in public, it's in lieu of alcohol maybe, or maybe it's to, maybe I'm having a cannabis infused coffee on a weekend morning and then I'm going to the farmer's market and, uplifting myself and my mood. So when I consume in public, let's say, I try to keep a low dose because I'm not trying to give myself anxiety or anything like that.
Yeah, yeah.
But I do find that it helps me connect better with people on a level of understanding of empathy that I don't usually have when I'm, let's say, my normal self, right? I feel like it really helps me like empathize more with people, and that's kind of a tool that I sometimes use when I, if I'm going to go out or whatever. I love using the plant for that.
Now, I definitely want to talk about the alcohol-free phase that you've been going through because I feel like, yeah, maybe in lieu of, that makes a lot of sense. But was there a particular experience where you noticed that empathy and you were like, huh, there's something more here that led you to diving into more learning?
Yeah. I think I'm a very type A go, go, go person, get out of my way. I'm trying to get shit done, right?
Yeah,
That's sort
yeah.
of just been who I am. And it's a lot of like my cultural upbringing as immigrants. You have to hustle, you have to make it in this world. Toronto's an expensive city. How are you going to make money? Grind, blah, 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 right? I'm fully in support of that. But the past few years and maybe post pandemic, I'm just realizing that there's more to life beyond money and success and whatever it is. And kind of that's what drew me to Cannabinista, was building a passion for educating and then going beyond stigmas. I think like maybe one time I was having a sesh with a friend and like they were confiding in me about something that they were feeling, and it was something that they had never normally confided into me. And for some reason, I felt more like I almost felt it in my heart, if it's a
Yeah.
clear way, right? Where I felt their pain. And I know this might sound crazy to people who are already very empathetic to begin with, but certain people actually just have trouble empathizing with other people, right? Or putting themselves in their shoes. And when, let's say, because I was elevated, I felt that sense of connection and like personal touch. And their story really resonated with me. And I was like, oh, wow, like this is something that I've never felt before. Like, how can I be deeper and like be more vulnerable? That's what it is. Being vulnerable in that state and connecting with others on a deeper level. That was the moment for me.
I think I know exactly what you mean when you feel someone else's emotions and like to the point where you may be brought to tears or like so happy that you need to immediately like express your happiness in some way, whichever way you're going on the spectrum. But I really felt it with music when I was
Mhm.
younger.
Yeah.
I don't know, it elevates you to so much of the work that I've done over the last few decades is in music. So I just feel like maybe it's feeling the lyrics more, maybe it's feeling like the rhythm, the
Yeah.
pace, all of that tempo, all of that. You bring up a really interesting point. So got you on that.
Yeah, it's like a vibration or something, but I'm the same, like,
Yes.
cannot dance for the life of me, but
Yeah.
when I have a little bit of cannabis, I don't feel as nervous, and, like, for some reason, my
Yeah.
voice and body kind of moves a bit better.
I am not a club girl, although I did competitive dance growing up. This is so funny. You try and get me like in some sort of rhythm at a club, and I'm like, does anyone want to go outside for a toke?
Yeah,
Because that's just so not me these days anymore. But
yeah.
yeah, it helped a lot in the early clubbing days, in my 20s for sure. I will say. Okay, so now like take me to the alcohol-free decision because I feel
Mhm.
like it plays a part in this
Mm.
next part of the story.
Yeah, ooh, alcohol, yeah. I was a party girl, like,
Okay.
period. I went to Western.
I went to
Well,
Western.
oh,
When
yeah?
did graduate?
Oh God, 2015.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm
20.
2010, but yeah.
Okay.
Anyway.
You know, I feel like, people when they have very strict parents or whatever, they want to rebel more, they want to try new things, whatever, right? I had a party phase, great. Ended up moving to Toronto afterwards, starting my career and all that. And, I was going out and things like that. And like, I just wasn't happy with who I was when I drank, how I felt the next day after I drank, and how it impacted my life the day after. So there was no real benefit for me at that time. This is not to say that alcohol cannot benefit certain people's, right? Maybe one or two drinks, people can make friends, be social. It's like a social lubricant. That's great. But for me, it just was not doing me any justice in my life. And I knew this for many years, but it really wasn't until I want to say like pre-COVID, almost kind of like leading up to that time. And also I was maturing, I was getting older as a woman and finding myself and being more comfortable, where I was really like, I don't need this. This doesn't help me. And it wasn't like I'm switching cannabis for alcohol. It was no means by any means like that. It was just like I don't see a purpose of alcohol in my life. And sometimes I'll try to have a glass of wine with friends, but even now I just don't like the taste for some reason. I just prefer like sparkling water, just regular water. But that's kind of what happened. It was kind of like an overnight decision, but a long time coming.
Totally makes sense. The other night I had a girlfriend here who normally we would have had a glass of wine at dinner. And I was like, well, I have a cannabis infused beverage or I have kombucha that we can put in our fancy glasses. And we were both like, we don't need to drink tonight, right? Like I'm going through that too. I think wine is like, it's a nice thing with dinner. It can complement the food, but all
Yes.
of what you're saying revolves around intentionality, I think.
Yes. Yes.
Right. And
Yeah.
that probably brought you to the mindfulness piece,
Yes.
which is so much a part of Cannabinista. Do you mind me asking, when you moved to Toronto, what was your career looking like? What were you doing for work?
Yeah. My background is like tech finance, strategy consulting, like very typical Asian person in Toronto. Um,
Where's your
so
family from too, by the way?
I grew up in Markham.
Mhm.
So my parents are from China, so they're immigrants, and we're here now. So I guess moving back to Toronto was just like coming back and then settling. But
Yeah.
you know,
I grew up
living.
in Richmond Hill, so
Oh,
totally
okay,
understand.
lovely. Yeah.
Okay. So, yeah, and continue with the a little bit of the like how you got from finance and tech to
Oh yes. Okay, how it all started. Yeah. It's a crazy story, but okay. So basically, COVID
Yep.
hit. TikTok was booming.
Yep.
Instagram Reels was popping off. People were like putting themselves out there. People had extra free time, didn't know what to do with themselves. And I was making edibles, right? That's literally what I was doing. And this was also around the time when legalization was in 2020, October 17th, 2020. So around this time, people are being a little bit more open about cannabis consumption and things like that online. And one day, I just started posting videos where I was making a frittata with cannabis oil or cookies. I like to do things that were a little bit different than just brownies and whatever.
Yeah.
Cannabis mocktails. I was also growing cannabis because you're allowed to grow up to 4 plants in Ontario, which is wonderful. And just started connecting with the community online. Like back then, you could use hashtags on cannabis and not get banned. So I started meeting people virtually, right? At that time, I started meeting owners of cannabis stores in Toronto. I started meeting people who worked for cannabis brands. And it was just all because they really liked my content. They thought it was genuine. They thought it was funny. And then how it became more than just me posting stuff online and became actually like, oh, I can actually build a platform and build a business out of this it was actually a year in of doing this. I had no strategy at that time. And one day I posted a video on TikTok. A brand had sent me a cannabis device, wasn't paid even. They just sent it to me for free and they're like, just have fun with it. I was like, okay. I made the worst video. Like if you looked at this video now, you would swipe because it's so unengaging. But I basically made a cannabis cake with this device and it blew up to 20 million views overnight. And I was smart at that time. I had affiliate links and I was able to benefit from that. And that I was able to see, oh wow, I could post a video and make money, right? And then from there, I started to think about strategy, started building out what is my niche, like what is my offering, why would people follow me, what's my value. So that's where my finance, tech, marketing, consulting side came in because it was able to help me scale and grow a business that worked. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so cool. It's really cool. Like when I came across your profile, part of me, like I'm working on building a business right now too, and
Mhm.
I was like, I love what she's doing with this. She's picked her lane. She's super serving her community, and the content is really interesting and very different.
Yeah, and
So I'll
that's
give you
like
big
my number one.
kudos.
Thank you. That's been my number one goal is to like bring the aesthetic or the way that we approach regular, like let's say fashion content or lifestyle content, but apply it to cannabis because I didn't see that in the cannabis world, right? I saw a lot of content that was like people ripping bongs, people rolling joints or whatever. And don't get me wrong, I love that content. I love it too, right? That is
Yeah.
what built the culture of 420 of cannabis. But I wanted to show content that was modern, elevated, that also appealed to me. I'm also a girly. I love all those things as well. So how did I? I was thinking about how can I bridge like two worlds together, and that was my
Yeah.
content. Yeah,
So key. So you just sort of brushed by, you won't get banned if you were using hashtags back in the day. Are you
yeah.
finding that there's still some barriers there with posting about cannabis?
There is immense censorship across
Tell
Meta,
me.
TikTok, and YouTube. Yes, so I've lost many accounts. I've had to rebuild communities and followers. Been banned off TikTok with original account. Been banned off Instagram. I've tried to get lawyers involved and write notes, and it doesn't work. At the end of the day, I've had
It's
to
a
play the
waste.
game. It's a waste. I've had to play the game. I censor everything I do and say on the platform in order to continue to exist. Um, so it's what you got to do though, right? Like you either post explicitly and risk getting banned, um, or you play the game, put broccoli emojis, don't type out the words, use letters and numbers, and I'm fine with playing this game. It's obviously exhausting, but it is what it is. I'm not going to be able to convince Meta to change their community guidelines. I can do it through advocacy, right? Through organizations, which I am doing on the side. But me as an individual, if I want to play the game and continue to exist, I got to play the game.
Hmm. Is there any of the advocacy work that you can talk about a bit?
Yes, I can talk about it. So I'll talk about in the past and then also what I'm doing now. I've spoken on different cannabis conference panels in Toronto and in Vancouver that are around cannabis marketing guidelines and social media guidelines. So there, I really tried to create advocacy where we had petitions actually to BC legislation about loosening the marketing and social guidelines. How do we get the government to partner with social media giants in order to make the rules the same as alcohol, right? People can make cocktails, they can sell Grey Goose ads, they can do all that on social media. How is that different, right? So
Yeah.
there was a bit of that. I've recently joined Normal, which is a organization in the US and in Canada, but essentially they advocate on different cannabis issues specifically within Canada. But one of my goals is to bring forth to parliament or whatever it is in the future is like how do we just bring more parity to alcohol industry and cannabis industry. It's not about like selling to the masses and like advertising to children. By no means that's not the purpose. It's just to like there's a lot of double standards with the industry, and it
Yes.
comes from lack of education.
Hmm. What's one of the most mind-blowing things that you learned in your early cannabis education journey?
About cannabis itself, or just like okay. One of the this is actually a really interesting one. So I cannabis oils, if you're familiar with that, right? Tinctures, oils. Tinctures are actually different because they're alcohol based, and we don't actually have them in Canada. They're usually in the U.S. Cannabis oils are oil format. People usually consume it under the tongue. You can sometimes put it in food if you mix it up and things like that. One thing that I had learned in my early days was that you can't just add cannabis oil to water based liquids. So I was sitting putting like I had a juice or water and I was putting oil in there thinking that it would work, but it doesn't work because it's not water soluble. So learned that the hard way. The oil would just sit on the top, and then that's when I actually learned about the science of cannabinoids and how they have to bind to fat in order to work. But now, as I mentioned, like at my event, there was Aspire Infusions, which is a technology that works with water-based liquids. So that's the new
Ah.
technology innovation that's coming out.
Ah, very
Yeah.
cool. Very cool. And just while we've been on the topic of the online space and this being a podcast about, being a woman in
Mhm.
many male dominant spaces,
Yeah.
I'm wondering, especially with stigma, there's an extra layer of stigma here. What type of comments and feedback you've received that might not be, it sounds like there's a really amazing community out there, but there's obviously some people who don't love it too.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, first you have the people who are very against cannabis, right? Because that's what they know from the 1980s, 19s, the war on drugs, all that, right? So there's that community.
You're losing brain cells, that community.
Yes. Um, so there's that community. And then obviously there's like, I think a lot of female creators go through this as well. Not just mine, every creator is men that like to involve gender in their comments, but in a negative way.
Mm.
So, an example of this is like when I have a viral video going on right now on Instagram for whatever reason. It's basically me lifting weights. I'm at the gym lifting weights, and I'm saying POV when you're a stoner trying to end stigmas or end stereotypes, something along the lines of that, right? So, the whole point of that video is to show that, hey, I'm not necessarily saying like I'm a stoner, but it's just obviously a word to like easily group those people.
Hmm.
But in that video, what I'm really trying to convey is that we are normal people. We're also healthy, fit, and active and have this lifestyle. And just because we
Yes.
consume the plant doesn't mean that we're lazy, don't work out, aren't active, yada, yada, yada. But I'm getting a lot of comments. Obviously, there's a lot of positive, but there's a lot of negative hate. A lot of negative hate where one individual I saw was saying, "You're a weak lady." So
Come on.
I think I would have appreciated more if they just said I was weak and not put lady, because I don't understand why you need to bring lady, man, or whatever into that context.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Or I'll get really gross comments that go to my hidden requests because I don't allow for that stuff. And where it's like, I need you as my wife, or you would be a good wife,
Oh my
or
God.
are you married? Do you have a boyfriend? Why does that matter? Or you're here for the
The content.
cannabis content, right? And I think like, I can appreciate, when people say I'm beautiful, thank you, right? But it's not necessary. Like, thank you, but no thank you. Sure, those ones are okay, but I think it's when they say things about marriage and being, can you be my wife? Those ones are really off-putting because it's like, I'm not just a wife. I'm being a wife is great, but like, why is there that word that, I don't know, just doesn't sit well with me?
No, no, I completely understand it. It's almost like, correct me if I'm wrong, but the vibe I get from the people who write those comments is that they're saying someone won't put up with my habits because they have a stigma about it and you would, but they're putting it in this misogynistic package.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
I don't
And
know.
it also baffles me just like when people take the time to comment certain things. Like for me personally, I don't. The only time I really comment is when I'm trying to support my other creators or other
Love that
people on the platform and elevate their content, right?
for
But I
sure.
will rarely really like opinionate on certain things. Like I opinionate in my head, but some things are just, why do you need to type? I think with social media, a lot of people want to just put their opinion out there for whatever reason. But sometimes, like, not saying something is better than saying something.
Mm-hmm. Check yourself, please.
Yeah, yeah.
um, Okay, so now let's talk a little more about the education factor here. Like specifically on fitness, like, I've seen you share a number of things about intentionally using, mindfully using
Yeah.
around fitness. Can you talk about your experience, like using the plant outside of what we would call just an environment where you're enjoying?
Yeah, for sure. With exercise and fitness, that's been a huge part of my life prior to consumption. Always been an active kid, played soccer, got into weightlifting, got into CrossFit, powerlifting, boxing, hot yoga, the whole plethora, right? I
Yeah,
just
yeah.
love being active. And sweating just makes me feel good. I don't know what it is.
I hear
Just
you.
feels great. When I started, the first time I used cannabis and then worked out was actually not for working out, it was for running. I hate running,
Me
period.
too.
I hate cardio. It hurts my knees. It gives me that blood copper taste in my throat. It's
Yeah.
makes like things itchy, especially if there's wind. I don't know what it
I
is.
do get that. That's
You
so
get that too,
weird.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just uncomfortable experience for
Okay.
me. And what it was actually on New Year's Day. I still remember this. It was 2 years ago on New Year's Day. I was like, you know what? I'm going to start off the year strong. I'm going to run 5K. I had a little bit of CBD oil beforehand, and I ran the entire 5 kilometers without stopping, and I've never done that before. And what the reason why was because I got let's say, lost in the run, where I wasn't thinking about the run, but more so I was observing objects and the environment around me. And I felt very supportive of myself. I could keep going, you know? I had that positive mindset. And, I've tried it again and it definitely has given me the same experience, but that was kind of when I first discovered that. Now I don't really consume cannabis before working out. I use it afterwards as a post workout recovery, especially topicals. I love lifting heavy weights, so I love putting it on my shoulders or areas where the cream can really just get in there and relax the muscles. Or cannabis bath bombs. I love that as
Oh,
well.
yeah.
Or just, having a nice gummy or oil or whatever afterwards that helps you really relax, especially if you're like me, type A person, can never turn off their mind. It's
Yeah.
just a great way to like post recovery workout.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And I remember watching you say something about like how you get questions about when you travel, how you get it over the border, and you were like, "Oh, or here's a novel idea. Maybe I can exist without it for a few days." So that's
Yes.
another funny thing with the stigma. Can you talk
Yes.
about that a bit?
Yeah. People immediately assume that I've gotten things like people say I'm an addict. I'm like, oh, okay. I guess I'm an addict now. I don't know that word is. And when I bring up the definition of an addict, I don't have it right now, but essentially an addict is someone who um cannot live without or something, right? Whatever it is, or they get certain emotions, whether it's anger or anxious or whatever, when they don't have something in their life. And in this instance, people are saying I'm an addict because I use cannabis every day, which I don't. And
Yep.
that is the key to having a healthy relationship. But that's with anything in life. Too much of anything, in my personal opinion, you can develop a dependency on it, right? Same thing with like skincare. If you use toner every day, you're probably going to be dependent on it, or like certain creams, right? If you drink alcohol every day, it's also the same thing, right? If you have candy every day, that's also not good. So it's really about balance and creating a healthy relationship with whatever something is, right? So when I talked about taking breaks when I'm, in a country or a state that doesn't have cannabis legalized, that is a time for me to just take my break and just be with myself, right? Like I think a lot of people are shocked by that because they see me as, oh, Cannabinista, she must be a everyday cannabis is her life and everything and be all. I have a life beyond cannabis, right? I'm not
Yeah.
just known for cannabis. My friends and family know me for my personality, my humor. I think obviously I show only cannabis because that's what people want to see, right? So I think there's that bit of balance there, but tolerance breaks are very important in my opinion.
Hmm.
I don't consume every day, so maybe 2 to 3 times a week, every other day I won't consume and I don't need it. Or I'll also take extended breaks. So every quarter I'll take a couple week breaks so that I'm just resetting my relationship. And also on a daily, like even if I am consuming, I try not to consume a lot, right? It's just about, I mean, it's better for your wallet too if you're not consuming that much.
Yeah.
But just keeping yourself in check and like having that discipline, I think was the key to my relationship with the plant.
You mentioned topicals, and I'm just so curious because I have found it pretty difficult to get a hold of products that I love, like
Mhm.
topicals,
Yeah.
um, outside of what you can buy at a shop that sells stuff that's regulated,
Yeah.
right? Are
Yeah.
you finding that too, or
Yeah, I mean that market is small. There's only
yeah,
like 10, 15 products and some of them don't have great ingredients, right? If you care about natural skincare and things like that, some of them have like sorbates and whatevers and like food coloring, FCF and all that kind of stuff. Um
yeah?
to be honest, I make my own at home.
And
Um
this is why I'm going to put a link to her community blast that you do, your e-blast, so you
yeah.
can, keep up with anything that she sends out in there, and her website, all that stuff will be in the show notes. But please continue. Yeah.
Yeah, I have lots of recipes on my website, and one of them is a muscle cream, where I literally just take cannabis flower, I put it into a machine, I do some magic. I'm not going to explain the science here,
Yeah, yeah.
and then combine it with shea butter, literally just like blocks of shea butter, almond oil, a little bit of peppermint or eucalyptus, whatever you like, and then it just creates a really nice cream. Just put it on some
Mm.
some parts of my muscles, and it's great.
I think the cannabis user in me loves a good little challenge when I'm using, especially to like make something from scratch. I've
Hmm.
really grown accustomed to that kind of stuff. Like, just the other night with a girlfriend, we were like, "Oh, let's try that recipe. That sounds perfect right now," and it was something
Yeah.
we had never made or done before. Do you find like creativity wise, we haven't really talked about that side of things. Like,
Hmm.
How does that feel when you are using?
Yeah, when I use the plant, I definitely feel very creative. That's when my best ideas come into my head, and especially if I'm consuming right before the shower. The shower is also a sacred place of creative million-dollar ideas, okay, for some reason. I
Yeah.
think it's like when your brain can actually like calm down from the rest of the world and actually like I'm pretty sure your brain like taps into like another part of your brain when you're in that
Yeah.
relaxed state. But definitely, when I use cannabis, I'm able to think from different perspectives, right? I may think about an idea where, I thought was a good idea. Maybe I found other reasons why it wasn't, or I was able to come up with something that was creative, or I thought of someone that I should connect with. That's often happens.
Yes.
Or yeah, it just, for some reason, it definitely just opens up. Obviously, it binds to your receptors, right? Your CB1 and CB2 receptors. And there's a lot of studies going on about that. But it does tap into that creative part of my brain. And,
Yeah.
that's what I love. Yeah.
Folks, what if I told you this podcast was born on a high? I was just like, in a zone thinking about also in the middle of, global pandemic, and I was like, I wanted to start a podcast that meant more than the podcasts I had done in the past.
Mm.
And, I had all my doodle pages, and sometimes that's just what happens when I'm using. And it had never been so clear what I wanted to do. That moment was very clear for me.
Yeah.
So,
And I feel like also when you're, consuming or when you're elevated, like you almost have more confidence in yourself to do it. Like for some reason, the idea that you're coming up with is like, fuck yeah, that's a good idea. Like obviously, like it could,
yeah.
not as amazing, but I think that confidence also adds to like your fuel and your passion to like go after it as well.
Yeah. And what about business and pitching this type of content? Obviously, I would imagine it goes great with people who are like minded in the industry. But what about things like funding and that kind of stuff? What's your experience been with that?
Yeah, I mean, like, there's a lot of regulations in Canada. So you're not allowed to have celebrity endorsements on cannabis marketing and all that. You're not allowed to promote it where it's like a sale or a promotion, right? There's a huge cannabis marketing guideline. I will say, I've seen many brands that go against this, right? For example, Snoop Dogg has a cannabis product. There's another, I think it's a retired NBA star who also has a product, and then there's a couple other who are associated with famous chefs in Toronto, for example. So people are playing around the rules. And you know what? Like, I think it's important for that to happen in order to advance the industry because you see people who are notable and also associated with alcohol or whatever it
All
is,
the
right?
time.
So it it's for the betterment of the industry, in my opinion, is to push the agenda forward. Obviously, like, playing within the rules, but being creative in how to do that. So with that said, like, have great partners, like not just in Canada, but in the US, like I have a lot of accessory cannabis product partners and things like that, who are California is definitely much more open, New York as
Yeah.
well. I love working with US brands in that sense. But yeah, it's a tough industry, right? So it's not as, let's say, like, the industry is still new, right? And I think a lot of people are seeing in the news that a lot of cannabis brands are not profitable, right? There's a lot of amalgamation, there's a lot of consolidation, and it's probably just what's going to happen with an industry. And I think it's about, for me at least, is like I cannot rely just on brand deals. I have to build an audience beyond that and monetize in different ways, right? So that's really my focus for next year is to not reduce my dependency on, let's say, brand deals, and it's like how can I create products for my community that are built by me. Yeah.
Oh, like taking those recipes and putting something on it.
Yes, exactly. Lots of things in
Okay.
the pipeline.
Okay.
Lots of good stoner ideas, that's for sure.
It feels like we're going to have to check in with Anna in about a year and see what's going on.
For sure, for
I'm
sure.
excited. I ask everyone who's come on this podcast these questions, but like, what is your proudest moment along the way and your hardest moment along the way?
I definitely think the proudest moment would have to be the event. And I know it's like a little bit of recency bias, let's say, but the the reason why I say it was the proudest moment was because actually going into it, I was very, very stressed. And I even said, I'm never doing this again to my
What?
to my social media assistant. And I was telling her because she was helping me with a lot of the event, and I was like, I'm never doing this again. It's not worth it. Like, it was it was a very small budget that we had to work with. It was two people, me and her, building everything, planning, executing literally physical heavy lifting because I had to reduce costs, right? I can't hire lifters or cleaners. Um, and I was like, it's a lot of work. I should have got more money, more funds to do it. You know, it was like hindsight 2020. And then at the event, people were like in tears. They were hugging me. They were
Oh.
crying because they felt so grateful that I created this community. Some people came and said like, "Oh, I'm like normally very anxious and like I wanted to come meet people and like you created such a safe environment for me." And like a lot of my community was women. So 70% actually is women at the event
Cool.
on social media. Yeah. Um, and I think that really left like a really soft spot in my heart. And I was like, fuck, I gotta do this again. They were asking me for another one. They're like, when you're doing your next one, we're gonna bring all our friends. And I was like, oh fuck, like maybe this is like a sign, you know? The fact
How
that
many
these
people was it?
it was only 40 people, but it was a very premium ticketed event. So I was even surprised that people would pay that amount to come see me, right?
Yeah.
And they even said, "Hey, charge us more." They're like, "You gave us so much value." Like, I think just hearing that like, and also I got a survey, so I got a scorecard, but my event rated like 95% out of satisfaction.
Yes,
So
girl.
it was
Love it.
amazing, right? So that I would say is my proudest moment is whenever I get messages online, whenever it's in person, or like when people tell me that, hey, you've impacted my life in a positive way, that tells me I'm doing something right and keeps me going. So that's my proudest moment.
Okay. Hardest.
Hardest moment is definitely, I want to say like maybe two things. The first one is like dealing with the influx of comments and knowing when to just ignore and shut down. Because you sometimes have to look at the negative comments in order to create content to go to respond to it, which that does really well, right? When you kind
It
of like,
does.
but then that takes a lot of mental energy to see all that the bullshit hate, right? I've gotten really good at it now where I can detach myself and I genuinely feel bad for those people who feel the need to comment
Yeah.
negatively. So I try to see it from that perspective. But in the beginning, it was rough. Like I would feel the need to like explain myself to everyone and justify myself. And I'm like, as I'm getting older too, I'm like, fuck it. Like I'm doing great. Like I'm good, you
Yeah.
know? But that took a long time and it was not easy. And it's still not easy today, right? I was mentioning I have this viral video right now. I'm getting hundred thousands of comments and I'm just trying to answer the ones that I do appreciate and respect. And you have to engage with the community. That's also the other thing, right? You can't just not respond at all. So that's tough. It's a mental toughness. And then the other part is just like being in an industry that is so new. It is so new, and no one is doing. I don't think anyone is doing anything similar to what I'm doing. Not even in the U.S. There are some creators who are like food and things like that, but I think I do have this niche right now, and
Yeah.
it's exciting because it's a lot of open space, green field that I can go and play whatever. But there also isn't a playbook, and it's very different from content creators in other spaces where they don't have the censorship. That is the
Mm.
crux of like what makes me nervous is like I can get shut down any day and it's like how do I make sure I have those followers on my own website, on my own newsletter, building my own community, being on platforms that allow for cannabis. Um, it's just different. It's almost like I have to build this playbook and figure it out on my own, which is can be lonely at times, but it's
Yeah.
just part of the hustle.
I feel so much of what you're saying because the podcasting game is also very.
Yeah.
I know everyone listens to podcasts, but the
Yeah.
actual like infrastructure of that industry is still in a very immature state,
Yeah.
right? Is there a wish if you could choose something to solve immediately in the cannabis industry? What would be the first thing that you would want, like, people who deal with regulations and laws would actually look at, like, tomorrow?
Ooh. I would That's a good one. What I would do in terms of if we're thinking really grandiose and regulations and whatever, this is probably never going to happen, but I'm going to say this is my ultimate wish list is that we're allowed to talk about cannabis on platforms as social platforms as long as it's educational and it's not
Yeah.
irresponsible use and not be censored and removed. Because I think it's not about like I don't think, we should the first step is like education. I'd rather just have us be able to educate and forget like promotion, like no ads, no whatever. I'm fine. Like that's fine. I think ultimately, as long as you're educating, the sales will come later on, right? And I think that's what I would really love the governments and social media giants to like look at. And for them, it's beneficial too. Cannabis is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and it's just the
Let's
beginning,
go.
right? So they can benefit from
Yeah.
from those hungry corporate whatevers, right? So yeah, that would be my ultimate dream.
And is it enough, to look at like a disclaimer even? Like if you're talking or talking about alcohol products or whatever, usually like you'll put a little disclaimer that says like, if we're talking about alcohol, you should be 19 years of age or older
Yeah,
to consume, right? Things like
yeah,
that. I'm asking open-ended, but it's an
yeah, yeah,
interesting
yeah.
thing. Could that help the social media case, right? If there was a disclaimer.
Yeah, so I do that now. I age gate my content. And
Ah.
that actually prevents me from getting more people, which is totally fine because it's important to be age gated, right? So I age gate it based on US and Canada. And then all my content also says disclaimer that is for educational or entertainment purposes only, but that doesn't do anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when I like what's interesting about that is like I can appreciate the disclaimers, but I also think back when we were kids growing up is like, you would download something from like LimeWire and like it would be like naked people, right? And there was no disclaimer. It would be like an accident, like virus or something, right? Or
Yeah.
you would turn on the TV late at night and it would be naked people, but there was no disclaimer. And we were allowed to like explore and learn about this world, right? And it's really different how things have shifted now.
Mm.
Is there's like a lot more strictness, I guess, and less freedom for people to just learn and like figure it out, right?
Yeah.
It's weird how media has changed.
I need you to do a podcast though. Like I legit need you to do a podcast because I would listen every week.
It's definitely something I want to do for 2024. I mean,
Okay.
I have way too many ideas. That's my problem is like, I need to continue to build my team. Obviously I cannot do this alone, and that's going to be a big part of like
Yes.
expanding into other verticals.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
awesome. So if you had to give me a couple names of other women who inspire you in the media space, in the cannabis space, that you might nominate to come on this podcast, who would they be?
I would have, two people. One of them is in the cannabis space. One of them is in the media space.
Sure.
First one is Riley. She is based in Boston, I believe. And she is a cannabis scientist. She has a PhD.
Ooh.
She creates content on social media that provides the scientific explanation of the cannabis plant, in various different ways, from consumption to the biology of the plant or whatever you call it. I'm not a science person, so I don't know.
Do you
But
know her socials off by heart? At
yes,
Riley.
it's no, it's CANNABICHEM, so Cannabichem. I think that's how you pronounce it, but it's like cannabis chemist. She is doing really, and she also has a partner who she works with, named Miyabi Shields as well. She is also a PhD. They are amazing in the type of content that they create because they are so smart and they're able to communicate about cannabis from a scientific perspective. And I think that is something that I lack, which I will learn so much from them. But like the way that they explain it, it's almost like hard to clap back at them, because it's science. So
Yeah.
I love their approach to it. They're very objective and they're wonderful. So I would
Cool.
definitely recommend them from that perspective.
Cool.
And then the other person I would recommend is actually like my social media team. So
Yeah.
I work with an agency called Branders Brand, specifically Silvana. She is like my right hand person for everything in strategy and all that, and like started working with her this year to really like create more strategy around what I'm doing. But her and her partner Holly, who is my PR strategist, they are literally on the ground from Toronto and built an agency that is providing different media services, and they work with mostly women businesses actually all over GTA. So really great to check them out. Branders Brand.
Thank you so much. I love this. This was a perfect Friday afternoon way to end my work week. So thank you.
Yes. Thank you. Thanks so much, Sarah, for giving me this platform to talk about cannabis. I love it. It's absolutely amazing. We need more of these.
You will find more about Anna Lee, aka the Cannabinista, in the show notes, including her website, thecannabinista.com, where you can head to find a ton of resources, education, and recipes. You'll find the rest at womeninmedia.ca, and thanks for listening.